And there we have it. Yeah, just test it here, see if I could read from the phone and stream same time. Indeed cannot, so I did go ahead and grab a tablet here for the Lovecraft collection. And now we can read that more properly. Let's see what we can do. First, we'll find we left off on the Winged Death. Winged Death. Somewhere around here we could probably search, but there's not that many. Ah, it's at the bottom. Interesting. I don't think it was at the bottom on desktop. Yep, that is where we left off. End of part 1, Journal of Thomas Slaunwhite, MD. The end of part 1 reads... And yeah, you tell me, since we're usually in the chill stone for these readings, would you rather just see me read it and look at you occasionally, or would you rather see the words on the tablet? We left off. Let this be the end of my journal. If in the end I am not suspected, it will serve its original purpose after my death and reveal what would otherwise not be known. If, on the other hand, these suspicions do materialize and persist, it will confirm and clarify the vague charges and fill in many important and puzzling gaps. Of course, if danger comes my way, I shall have to destroy it. Well, Moore is dead, as he amply deserves to be. Now Dr. Thomas Slaunwhite is dead, too, and when the body formerly belonging to Thomas Slaunwhite is dead, the public may have this record. That is where we left off in part 1. Continue on part 2 with the rest of the people we saw on the subway or such. And we'll see about that. Go from there. Yeah, hard to decide if you'd rather see me like usual in the Chillstone, or if we just have this more unique tablet reading. Either way, for now, I guess we'll focus tablet so you can read along. You see enough of me on main show after all. Alrighty. Part 2 we go. Hopefully everything's steady and stable. If the chat crew says broken, we can optimize and improve from there. For now, part 2 of Winged Death. January 15th, 1932. A new year and a reluctant reopening of this journal. This time I am writing solely to relieve my mind, for it would be absurd to fancy that the case is not definitely closed. I am settled in the Val Hotel, Johannesburg, under my new name, and no one has so far challenged my identity. Have had some inconclusive business talks to keep up my part as a mine broker, and believe I may actually work myself into that business. Later I shall go to Toronto and plant a few evidences for my fictitious past. But what is bothering me is an insect that invaded my room around noon today. Of course, I have had all sorts of nightmares about blue flies of late, but those were only to be expected in view of my prevailing nervous strain. This thing, however, was a walking actuality, and I am utterly at a loss to account for it. It buzzed around my bookshelf for fully a quarter of an hour, and eluded every attempt to catch it or kill it. The queerest thing was its color and aspect, for it had blue wings and was in every way a duplicate of my hybrid envoys of death. How it could possibly be one of these, in fact, I certainly don't know. I disposed of all the hybrids, stained and unstained, that I didn't send to Moore, and can't recall any instance of escape. Can this be wholly or hallucination? Or could any of the specimens that escaped in Brooklyn when Moore was bitten have found their way back to Africa? There was that absurd story of the blue fly that waked Dyson when Moore died, but after all, the survival and return of some of the things is not impossible. It is perfectly plausible that the blue should stick to their wings, too, for the pigment I devised was almost as good as tattooing for permanence. By elimination, that would seem to be the only rational explanation for this thing, though it is very curious that the fellow has come as far south as this. Possibly it's some hereditary homing instinct inherent in the CC strain. After all, that side of him belongs to South Africa. I must be on my guard against a bite. Of course, the original venom, if this is actually one of the flies that escaped from Moore, was worn out ages ago. But the fellow must have fed as he flew back from America, and he may well have come through Central Africa and picked up a fresh infectivity. Indeed, that's more probable than not, for the palace half of his heredity would naturally take him back to Uganda, and all the Typanomaceous germs. I still have some of the typarsimide left. I couldn't bear to destroy my medicine case, incriminating though it may be, but since reading up on the subject, I am not so sure about the drug's action as I was. It gives one a fighting chance. Certainly it saved Gamba, but there's always a large probability of failure. It's devilish queer that this fly should have happened to come into my room, of all places in the wide expanse of Africa. Seems to strain coincidence on the breaking point. I suppose that if it comes again, I shall certainly kill it. I am surprised that it escaped me today, for ordinarily these fellows are extremely stupid and easy to catch. Can it be a pure illusion after all? Certainly the heat is getting me of late, as it never did before, even up around Uganda. January 16th. Am I going insane? The fly came again this noon, and acted so anomalously that I can't make head or tail of it. Only delusion on my part could account for what that buzzing pest seemed to do. It appeared from nowhere, and went straight to my bookshelf, circling again and again to font a copy of Moore's Diptera of Central and Southern Africa. Now and then it would light on top or back of the volume, and occasionally it would dart forward toward me and retreat before I could strike it at it with a folded paper. Such cunning is unheard of among the notoriously stupid African Diptera. For nearly half an hour I tried to get the cursed thing, but at last it darted out the window through a hole in the screen that I hadn't noticed. At times I fancied it deliberately mocked me by coming within reach of my weapon, and then skillfully sidestepping as I struck out. I must keep a tight hold of my consciousness. January 17th. Either I am mad, or the world is in the grip of some sudden suspension of the laws of probability as we know them. The damnable fly came in from somewhere just before noon, and commenced buzzing around the copy of Moore's Diptera on my shelf. Again I tried to catch it, and again yesterday's experience was repeated. Finally, the pest made for the open inkwell on my table and dipped itself in, just the legs and thorax, keeping its wings clear. Then it sailed up to the ceiling and lit, beginning to crawl around in a curved patch and leaving a trail of ink. After a time, it hopped a bit and made a single ink spot unconnected with the trail. Then it dropped squarely in front of my face and buzzed out of sight before I could get it. Something about this whole business struck me as monstrously sinister and abnormal, more so than I could explain to myself. When I looked at the ink trail on the ceiling from different angles, it seemed more and more familiar to me, and it dawned on me suddenly that it formed an absolutely perfect question mark. What device could be more malignly appropriate? It is a wonder that I did not faint. So far, the hotel attendants have not noticed it, Have not seen the fly this afternoon and evening, but in keeping my inkwell securely closed. I think my extermination of more must be preying on me and giving me morbid hallucinations. Perhaps there is no fly at all. January 18th. Into what strange hell of living nightmare am I plunged? What occurred today is something which could not normally happen, and yet an hotel attendant has seen the marks on the ceiling and concedes their reality. About 11 o'clock this morning, as I was writing on a manuscript, something darted down to the inkwell for a second and flashed aloft again before I could see what it was. Looking up, I saw that hellish fly on the ceiling as it had been before, crawling along and tracing another trail of curves and turns. There was nothing I could do, but I folded a newspaper in readiness to get the creature if it should fly near enough. When it had made several turns on the ceiling, it flew into a dark corner and disappeared. And as I looked upward at the doubly defaced plastering, I saw that the new ink trail was that of a huge and unmistakable figure 5. For a time I was almost unconscious from a wave of nameless menace for which I could not fully account. Then I summoned up my resolution and took an active step. Going out to a chemist's shop, I purchased some gum and other things necessary for preparing a sticky trap. Also a duplicate inkwell. Returning to my room, I filled the new inkwell with the sticky mixture and set it where the old one had been, leaving it open. Then I tried to concentrate my mind on some reading. About 3 o'clock, I heard the accursed insect again, and saw it circling around the new inkwell. It descended to the sticky surface, but did not touch it, and afterward sailed straight toward me, retreating before I could hit it. Then it went to the bookshelf and circled around More's treatise. There is something profound and diabolic about the way the intruder hovers near the book. The worst part was the last. Leaving More's book, the insect flew over to the open window and began beating itself rhythmically against the wire screen. There would be a series of beats, and then a series of equal length, and another pause, and so on. Something about this performance held me motionless for a couple of moments, but after that I went over to the window and tried to kill the noxious thing. As usual, no use. It merely flew across the room to a lamp and began beating the same tattoo on the stiff cardboard shade. I felt a vague desperation, and proceeded to shut all the doors, as well as the window, whose screen had the imperceptible hole. It seemed very necessary to kill this persistent being, whose hounding was rapidly unseating my mind. Then, unconsciously counting, I began to notice that each of its series of beatings contained just 5 strokes. 5. The same number that the thing had traced in ink on the ceiling in the morning. Could there be any conceivable connection? The notion was maniacal, for that would argue a human intellect and a knowledge of written figures in the hybrid fly. A human intellect did not that take one back to the most primitive legends of the Uganda blacks? And yet there was the infernal cleverness in eluding me, as contrasted with the normal stupidity of the breed. As I laid aside my folded paper and sat down in growing horror, the insect buzzed aloft and disappeared through a hole in the ceiling where the radiator pipe went to the room above. The departure did not soothe me, for my mind had started on a train of wild and terrible reflections. If this fly had a human intelligence, where did that intelligence come from? Was there any truth in the native notion that these creatures acquire the personality of their victims after the latter's death? If so, whose personality did this fly bear? I had reasoned out that it must be one of those which escaped from Moore at the time he was bitten. Was this the envoy of death which had bidden Moore? If so, what did it want with me? What did it want with me anyway? In a cold perspiration, I remembered the actions of the fly that had bitten Bata when Bata died. Had its own personality been replaced by that of its dead victim? Then there was that sensational news account of the fly that waked Dyson when Moore died. As for that fly that was hounding me, could it be that a vindictive human personality drove it on? How it hovered around Moore's book. I refused to think any farther than that. All at once I began to feel sure that the creature was indeed infected, and in the most virulent way, with a malign deliberation so evident in every act. It must surely have charged itself on purpose with the deadliest bacilli in all Africa. My mind, thoroughly shaken, was now taking the thing's human qualities for granted. I now telephoned the clerk and asked for a man to stop up the radiator pipe hole and other possible chinks in my room. I spoke of being tormented by flies, and he seemed to be quite sympathetic. When the man came, I showed him the ink marks on the ceiling, which he recognized without difficulty. So they are real. The resemblance to a question mark and a figure 5 puzzled and fascinated him. In the end, he stopped up all the holes he could find and mended the window screen, so that I can now keep both windows open. He evidently thought me a bit eccentric, especially since no insects were in sight while he was here. But I am past minding that. So far the fly has not appeared this evening. God knows what it is, what it wants, or what will become of me. January 19th. I am utterly engulfed in horror. The thing has touched me. Something monstrous and demonic is at work around me, and I am a helpless victim. In the morning, when I returned from my breakfast, that winged fiend from hell brushed into the room over my head, and began beating itself against the window screen as it did yesterday. This time, though, each series of beats contained only 4 strokes. I rushed to the window and tried to catch it, but it escaped as usual, and flew over to Moore's treatise, where it buzzed around mockingly. Its vocal equipment is limited, but I noticed that its spells of buzzing came in groups of 4. Alright, groups of 4. Let's do a quick stream test since I do have access to tablet and all. Is there really only Safari? There we go, something else. Okay. Yep, let's just make sure everything is stable, because it is hard to tell on mobile streams in general. But I think we're okay. Yes. Don't know where the heck the volume is. I think we're okay. Yeah, very fast internet here, so it's gotta be a lot more direct than usual. Alright, just making sure we're stable and steady. It's funny. It's such a good, low delay compared to my usual mountain internet. This is proper city internet here. Oh, yeah. Anyway, good fun for Winged Death. Let's carry on. I guess this works. You're just seeing me instead of reading along. It's kind of easier. Okay. Less comfortable. Okay. Came in groups of 4. By this time I was certainly mad, for I called out to it, "More, more, for God's sake, what do you want?" When I did so, the creature suddenly ceased its circling, flew toward me, and made a low, graceful dip in the air, somehow suggestive of a bow. Then it flew back to the book. At least, I seem to see it do all this, though I am trusting my senses no longer. And when the worst thing happened, I had left my door open, hoping the monster would leave if I could not catch it. But about 11:30 I shut the door, concluding it had gone. Then I settled down to read. Just at noon I felt a ticking on the back of my neck. But when I put my hand up, nothing was there. In a moment, I felt the ticking again. Tickling again. And before I could move, that nameless spawn of hell sailed into view from behind, did another of those mocking graceful dips in the air, and flew out through the keyhole, which I had never dreamed was large enough to allow its passage. That thing had touched me. I could not doubt. It had touched me without injuring me. And then I remembered in a sudden cold fright that Moore had been bitten on the back of the neck at noon. No invasion since then, but I have stuffed all the keyholes with papers, and shall have a folded paper ready for use whenever I open the door to leave or enter. January 20th. I cannot yet believe fully in the supernatural, yet I fear none the less that I am lost. The business is far too much for me. Hello, thank you. Great. Yes, it's here. UPS. Alright. Well, that's a new one, right? Okay. Okay, yet I fear none the less that I am lost. The business is too much for me. Just before noon today, that devil appeared outside the window and repeated its beating operations, but this time in a series of 3. When I went to the window, it flew off, out of sight. I still have resolution enough to take one more defensive step. Still have resolution enough to take one more defensive step. Removing both window screens, I coated them with my sticky preparation, the one I used in the inkwell, outside and inside, and set them back in place. If that creature attempts another tattoo, it will be its last. Rest of the day in peace. Can I weather this experience without becoming a maniac? Let's find out. January 21st. On board train of Bloemfontein. This is pretty much where the story began. Pretty much, yeah. I am routed. This thing is winning. It has diabolic intelligence against which all my devices are powerless. It appeared outside the window this morning, but did not touch the sticky screen. Instead, it sheared off without lighting and began buzzing around in circles, 2 at a time, followed by a pause in the air. After several of these performances, it flew off out of sight over the roofs of the city. My nerves are just about at the breaking point, for these suggestions of numbers are capable of a hideous interpretation. Monday, the thing dwelt on the figure 5. Tuesday, it was 4. Wednesday, it was 3. And now today, it is 2. 5, 4, 3, 2. What can this be save some monstrous and unthinkable counting off of days? For what purpose, only the evil powers of the universe can know. I spent all the afternoon packing and arranging about my trunks, and now I have taken the night express for Bloemfontein. Flight may be useless, but what else can one do? January 22nd. Settled at the Orange Hotel, Bloemfontein. A comfortable and excellent place, but the horror followed me. I had shut all the doors and windows, stopped all the keyholes, locked for any possible chinks, and pulled down all the shades. But just before noon, I heard a dull tap on one of the window screens. I waited, and after a long pause, another tap came, a second pause, and still another single tap. Raising the shade, I saw that accursed fly, as I had expected. It described one large, slow circle in the air, and then flew out of sight. I was left as weak as a rag, and had to rest on the couch. 1. This was clearly the burden of the monster's present message. One tap, one circle. Did this mean one more day for me before some unthinkable doom? Ought I to flee again, or entrench myself here by sealing up the room? After an hour's rest, I felt able to act, and ordered a large reserve supply of canned and packaged food, also linen and towels, sent in. Tomorrow I shall not under any circumstances open any crevice of door or window. When the food and linen came, the black looked at me queerly. But I no longer care how eccentric or insane I may appear. I am hounded by powers worse than the ridicule of mankind. Having recited my supplies, I went over every square millimeter of the walls, and stopped up every microscopic opening I could find. At last I feel able to get real sleep. Handwriting here becomes irregular, nervous, and very difficult to decipher. January 23rd. It is just before noon, and I feel that something very terrible is about to happen. Didn't sleep as late as I expected, even though I got almost no sleep on the train the night before. Up early, and have had trouble getting concentrated on anything, reading or writing. That slow, deliberate counting off of days is too much for me. I don't know which has gone wild, nature or my head. Until about 11, I did very little except walk up and down the room. Then I heard a rustle among the food packages brought in yesterday, and that demonic fly crawled over before my eyes. I grabbed something flat and made passes at the thing despite my panic fear, but with no more effect than usual. As I advanced, that blue-winged horror retreated, as usual, to the table where I had piled my books, and lit for a second on Moore's Diptera of Central and Southern Africa. Then, as I followed, it flew over the mantel clock, and lit on the dial near the figure 12. Before I could think up another move, it had begun to crawl around the dial very slowly and deliberately, in the direction of the hands. It passed under the minute hand, curved down and up, passed under the hour hand, and finally came to a stop exactly at the figure 12. As it hovered there, it fluttered its wings with a buzzing noise. If this a portent of some sort, I am getting as superstitious as the blacks. The hour is now a little after 11. Is 12 the end? I have just one last resort, brought to my mind through utter desperation. Wish I had thought of it before. Recalling that my medicine case contains both of the substances necessary to generate chlorine gas, I have resolved to fill the room with that lethal vapor, asphyxiating the fly while protecting myself with an amnesia-sealed handkerchief tied over my face. Fortunately, I have a good supply of ammonia. This crude mask will probably neutralize the acrid chlorine fumes till the insect is dead, or at least helpless enough to crush. But I must be quick. How can I be sure that the thing will not suddenly dart for me before my preparations are complete? I ought not to be stopping to write in this journal. Is this to be my last entry in this journal? It would be useless to try to deny what I suspect. Too often a grain of incredible truth lurks behind the wildest and most fantastic of legends. Is the personality of Henry Moore trying to get at me through this blue-winged devil? Is this the fly that bit him and that in consequence absorbed his consciousness when he died? If so, and if it bites me, will my own personality displace Moore's and enter the buzzing body when I die of the bite later on? Perhaps. Though I need not die even if it gets me. There is always a chance with trypsarcamide, and I regret nothing. Moore had to die, but the outcome what it will. Slightly later. The fly has paused on the clock dial near the 45-minute mark. It is now 11:30. I am saturating the handkerchief over my face with ammonia and keeping the bottle handy for further applications. This will be the final entry before I mix the acid and manganese and liberate the chlorine. I ought not to be losing time, but it steadies me to get things down on paper. But for this record, I'd have lost all my reason long ago. The fly seems to be getting restless, and the minute hand is approaching it. Now for the chlorine. End of the journal. On Sunday, January 24th, 1932, after repeated knocking had failed to gain any response from the eccentric man in room 303 of the Orange Hotel, a black attendant entered with a passkey and at once fled shrieking downstairs to tell the clerk what he had found. The clerk, after notifying the police, summoned the manager, and the latter accompanied Constable DeWitt, Coroner Bogart, and Dr. Van Keulen to the fatal room. The occupant lay dead on the floor, his face upward, and bound with a handkerchief which smelled strongly of ammonia. Under the covering of the features showed an expression of stark, utter fear, which transmitted itself to the observers on the back of the neck. Dr. Van Keulen found a virulent insect bite, dark red, with a purple ring around it. Yeah, there was supposed to be a period there. There was not. That was why it was that. Purple ring around it, which suggested a tsetse fly or something less innocuous. An examination indicated that death must be due to heart failure induced by sheer fright, rather than to the bite. Well, better than the gas, right? Though a subsequent autopsy indicated that the germ of Trypanosomus had been introduced into the system. On the table were several objects. A worn leather blank book containing the journal just described, a pen, writing pad, an open inkwell, a doctor's medicine case with the initials TS marked in gold, bottles of ammonia and hydrochloric acid, and a tumbler about a quarter full of black manganese dioxide. The ammonia bottle demanded a second look, because something besides the fluid seemed to be in it. Looking closer, Coroner Bogart saw that the alien occupant was a fly. It seemed to be some sort of hybrid with vague CC affiliations, but its wings, showing faintly blue despite the action of the strong ammonia, were a complete puzzle. Something about it waked a faint memory of newspaper reading Dr. Van Keulen, a memory which the journal was soon to confirm. Its lower parts seemed to have been stained with ink, so thoroughly that even the ammonia had not bleached them. Possibly it had fallen at one time into the inkwell, though the wings were untouched. But how had it managed to fall into the narrow neck ammonia bottle? It was as if the creature had deliberately crawled in and committed suicide. But the strangest thing of all was that what Constable DeWitt noticed on the smooth white ceiling overhead as his eyes roved around about curiously. At his cry, the other three followed his gaze. Even Dr. Van Keulen, who had for some time been thumbing through the worn leather book with an expression of mixed horror, fascination, and incredulity. The thing on the ceiling was a series of shaky, staggering ink tracks, such as might have been made by the crawling of some ink-drenched insect. At once everyone thought of the stains on the fly so oddly found in the ammonia bottle. But these were no ordinary ink tracks. Even at first glance, revealed something hauntingly familiar about them, and closer inspection brought gasps of startled wonder from all four observers. Coroner Bogart instinctively looked around the room to see if there were any conceivable instrument or arrangement of piled-up furniture which could make it possible for those straggling marks to have been drawn by human agency. Finding nothing of the sort, he resumed his curious and almost awestruck upward glance. For beyond a doubt, these inky smudges formed definite letters of the alphabet, letters coherently arranged in English words. The doctor was the first to make them out clearly, and the others listened breathlessly as he recited the insane-sounding message so incredibly scrawled in a place no human hand could reach. See my journal. It got me first. I died. Then I was in it. The blacks are right. Strange powers in nature. Now I will drown what is left. Presently, amidst the puzzled hush that followed, Dr. Van Keulen commenced reading aloud from the worn leather journal. That will conclude Winged Death, our latest Lovecraft tale, Fun Times in the Dragon's Roost. Thanks to any lurkers and, of course, viewers on YouTube, since it will hopefully be immortalized for all time and prosperity. See you tomorrow. Good night. We'll be back. See you in a bit. Head out. See you tomorrow. Good night. We'll be back. See you in a bit. Head out. See you tomorrow.